Welcome everyone to another entry into the King of Games 1992. We are back again with another hot matchup, some spicy competition, if I do say so myself, from two games that are very different, could possibly be not any more different. And this is not the first or last time this is going to happen in this tournament, and that is part of the reason why it is so entertaining. And I am sure that once this entry is over, we will have probably some butt hurt, and it's probably going to originate at least from one person on this show. At least I have a sense. But at any rate, I am joined today by two illustrious guest hosts here who are helping us make this thing happen. I have Adam from The Good, The Bad, and The Backlog, and Jeff of G-Spot Gaming. Gentlemen, how are we doing today?
Good. Say good day to your mum for me.
Thanks, Mark Wahlberg. I'll get on that.
Yeah, also good over here. Also good. I've never met your mum, but I hope she's doing well.
Oh, well, thank you. That's very nice.
Yep.
I also feel that illustrates the difference between British and Australian culture right there. So there you go. We are nothing if not international. Gentlemen, we are here to make some determinations that are entirely objective and absolute about Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 4, Turtles in Time for the Super Nintendo, and Final Fantasy 5.
Can I just say,
yeah,
this feels like I'm at jury duty, and this is a very serious case that we're dealing with.
I would tend to agree. Let me see. What's the word? There's a lot of gravitas here.
Yeah. This is a make or break decision that is going to have the fate of the world at the resolution. You know what I mean? I can't speak properly. It's 11 p.m.
Or at the very least, the fate of several people just tuning the fuck out from the rest of this competition. But at any rate, if for some strange reason this is the first episode that you're tuning into, and I don't know why that would be, maybe you're just cherry picking because you happen to be a fan of one of these games and you just really want to be hurt and or feel something, which I guess I could relate with on some level. But this is, in fact, the King of Games tournament, and we have a bracket of games from a given year. This is, of course, 1992. This is kind of how these two were seeded based on the voting that took place prior to this. And the way that we're going to run through this is we will provide some high-level general information about both of the games. We'll have some discussion of a somewhat academic nature about both of said games. And then from there, we're going to take a quick break. And then we're going to jump into really the meat of the episode, which is going through the 4 different categories that we are rating these games on. And when I say rating, technically we're going to give them points, as in one game is going to take the category for each of us. So we're each going to make that determination. And at the end of those 4 categories, there will be one that could be considered a winner. But here's the catch. Much like Whose Line Is It Anyway? The points do not matter whatsoever. And actually, in most cases, we will just totally throw that out. There's really no bearing on how the rest of the episode will go.
Thank God, because I suck at maths.
Well, fortunately for you, I'll be keeping track of that. Probably. It ultimately doesn't really matter because one game could sweep the whole damn thing, and then the other one will just end up taking the bracket. It has happened.
It has. Yeah. No, I was saying, I'm thinking I've been on previous King of Games, and you have a really thorough discussion. You're all on the same page. You really think one game is going to take it, and then nostalgia hits or just bias hits, and you can go away and you can be a jury. You can try and be, you can try to center yourself, but at the end of the day, sometimes nostalgia just plays too big of a part.
That is absolutely true. I've seen some deathbed conversions, such as it is on this tournament and in the previous one too. So you never know quite what's going to happen. As far as those 4 categories are concerned, we'll be talking about the critical reception, our personal attachment to both of the games, the legacy that they have left behind, and then what we refer to as head to head, which really just means if someone was to sit you down right now and hand you both of these games, which one would you choose to play and why? That's really what that is. All right. So with all of that out of the way, is there anything that either of you would like to throw in, or should we just jump right into some high level discussion?
I just was thinking that nostalgia is a hell of a drug, and that's probably why a lot of people still think that Zelda Ocarina of Time is the best game ever.
Wow. I mean, not at all related to this episode, but that's a personal shot, Adam. Thank you.
It might
Shots
have been.
fired. Wow. Also, not necessarily best game ever. I just want to put that out there.
Okay, fine. Favorite
Possibly
game.
one of the best Zelda games, maybe.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's all. Carry on.
Okay. I mean, Majora's Mask can fuck right off, but that's a whole other story.
Oh, the scandal.
I've never been shy about my feelings regarding that weird ass spin-off game. But at any rate, that's not what we're here to talk about today. So we are going to start with TMNT 4, Turtles in Time, which is, I suppose, probably more what it's just colloquially known as. If you don't already know, Turtles in Time is a side-scrolling beat-em-up featuring the titular Turtles, as it were, for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System in its 16-bit glory. It was released in Japan on July 24th of course, 1992. It made its way over to North America on August 15th, and in the EU on November 19th, where there it was known as Teenage Mutant Hero Turtles, because apparently they just really had something against ninjas. Jeff, can you elaborate on that for me just a little bit? Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, I think it was always to do with ninjas just sounded too violent. So because it was a TV show, well, obviously we can go into the history of Turtles if we wanted to with the comics and how violent they were.
Sure.
Like Shredder getting shanked in the first comic and things like that.
Right.
Because it was a cartoon. I think maybe the same in Australia, New Zealand as well, right? Like they just decided ninjas is too violent. So hero sounds far more kid friendly.
Fair enough.
Actually, I think Australia kept Ninja. I'm pretty sure it was just Europe.
Oh, did you? Oh, good on you. Yeah, nice.
Yeah. We're all convicts down here anyway, so we're not ashamed of any violence.
Yeah, they're no strangers to shanks.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Well, at any rate, the game was, of course, developed and published by Konami back when that still meant something. So moving on to the critical reception and sales for Turtles in Time, we have a game rankings aggregate score of 83%, pretty respectable. Some contemporaneous scores at the time. Electronic Gaming Monthly, or EGM, gave it a 36 out of 40. Nintendo Power slapped a 4 out of 5 on it. And then a couple of publications from the UK, Game Zone and Mean Machines, gave it a 93 and 80% respectively. Talking about some awards and recognition for the game, it is ranked 7th in Top Games of 1992 by Nintendo Power. IGN placed it at 39th in their top 100 SNES games of all time. Speaking of all time lists, there's quite a few of those. So the last two here, we have Games Radar gave it its 24th spot, with Complex giving it 9th.
Wow.
So pretty high up there. So this one blew my mind. I'm going to be honest. Typically, we like to find the sales figures for these games because that is part of the discussion here. And unbelievably, I could not unearth any sales numbers for Turtles in Time for the Super Nintendo whatsoever. I went to the usual places. I went to VG charts. I scoured through the wiki page. I did a lot of Googling, and I could not find a single thing. So anecdotally, Turtles in Time sold pretty well, if for nothing other than at least everyone I knew owned it. I owned it. I still own it. It was what one might say kind of a big deal. So take that for what it is, because we don't actually have any hard numbers.
Yeah, I was thinking, because Turtles in the UK, where I'm from, was a really, really big thing.
Mm-hmm.
But around 92, we're talking about the show being, 4 or 5 years old. The movie had I think the second movie was out by then, and it kind of bombed. Like, Turtle Mania was on the way down, especially over here.
Mm-hmm.
When you see copies, I'm kind of relating it to copies that you see today of Turtles in Time. It's a really, really, and it always has been a really expensive retro game.
Mm-hmm.
And that to me suggests that there's just not many copies of it flying around. It's not a case of Turtles is always popular. It feels like a typical Konami thing, like with Castlevania, where just trying to get hold of a copy is hard enough.
Well, now that makes me wonder how much my cartridge is worth. I should probably look that up at some
Definitely
point.
have a look, especially the US one. That's just an anecdote. I could be completely off, but yeah, Turtles, it kind of from early to, I think Nickelodeon did a reboot of the show in the late 90s, I think, but it was kind of waning in the mid 90s. So maybe it was on the way down. Could be wrong.
No, I think that's a fair assessment.
So just to clarify, does that mean that it was popular or it wasn't popular?
It was popular, but I think the show, the TV series had just ran its course. The second movie wasn't very good, although the games are great.
Oh, no, I mean more like if the game is hard to find, is that because there are less copies of it available or more people bought it?
I usually go down the route of it. And this is, as I say, maybe typical Konami. They just didn't make enough for the region.
Right. Okay. That's cool. I'm just trying to follow your logic. That's all.
Okay. Don't follow my brain too much. It leads to weird places.
Well, anecdotally, I can tell you that Turtles it sold decently here.
Yeah, I'll say also not directly related, but I take personal offense to the notion that Secret of the Ooze was a bad movie. That movie is fucking brilliant, and I will fight anyone that says otherwise.
I agree.
Fair enough.
I mean, come on. Vanilla Ice with the turtle rap. How could that be bad?
It's the ultimate stamp of cool, isn't it? Having Vanilla Ice on your soundtrack. Yeah.
Sure was, I guess.
I remember watching that and wishing, oh, I want some of that ooze so I can turn into a big monster because that's what I wanted to be as a kid.
Is it bad that like part of me, this is where I think I have my inner fat kid is just like the thing that stood out to me more was like the box of donuts that they put the ooze ice cubes inside of. I was just like,
yeah.
Man, those donuts do look like num nums. Anyway, so as far as some high level discussion about the actual game itself, I mean, I'm not sure what there is to say, frankly. I think most people know what Turtles in Time is. Like I said, it's a side scroller beat 'em up, very similar to the arcade release from Konami, which I believe was the year prior. This was the first time that the art style and everything like that was really translated to the home console in a meaningful way, because before this, and if you've listened to our show, you know that we've already done an episode on TMNT 2, the arcade game that was released, and that was the home port of that, and it's not quite the same as one might suppose. So this was really the first time that you had something for, you know, a TMNT arcade game at home that looked more or less just like what you saw in the arcade.
Did you frequent arcades? Because I actually had no idea that TMNT Turtles in Time was an arcade game, just because there were so few arcades in my area that I never saw one.
I mean, I did. We had one. I mean, I grew up in a fairly small town, so we really only had like one arcade, but it was at the local mall. So that was kind of where all the kids hung out back when malls were still a thing.
Did you play this there though?
I did, actually.
Oh.
Yeah. They had a cabinet there. I was actually pretty fortunate. In retrospect, that one small arcade was called the Dream Machine.
Nice.
Yeah. Great name also. They tended to have a lot of the more popular cabinets, I guess, being like, well, no pun intended, the only game in town regarding arcades at any rate, I guess maybe benefited them. Of course, we had a smattering of pizza joints that happened to have like one Street Fighter machine or whatever, but that was pretty much the place to go.
God, you're so American. I love it.
What about what I just said specifically?
Arcades and pizza places.
Oh, hey man, that was peak 90s. I mean,
yeah.
Chris and I have had that conversation on the show about how like that early 90s Pizza Hut aesthetic is 100% a thing.
Yep.
Yeah. It's funny because I remember seeing that kind of stuff in movies, like American movies from the 90s, and I'm like, wow, that is so foreign to me. But yeah, I'm picturing like Stranger Things kind of stuff. Anyway.
It's actually not that far off.
Yeah.
Honestly.
But anyway, Turtles in Time.
Yes.
Side-scrolling beat 'em up. Never knew it was an arcade game. Knew it was on the Super Nintendo. And yeah, pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, it's a, you know, as most arcade games are, it's a fairly succinct experience. You can get through the whole thing in under 30 minutes. Typically, when I do a run through, I'm somewhere in the neighborhood of like 20 to 25 minutes. I think the last time Chris and I co-opted it on hard mode. I think it was like 23 minutes and change is what we made it through. So
Jesus.
That's pretty fast.
yeah, so it's not a long game.
Mm.
It is very good in that it has been regarded as one of the best side-scrolling beat 'em ups to really ever been made. The controls are very tight. The art style is fantastic. Plus, you've got some of the extras in there as far as like being able to swap it to more of like a comics art style, which always was pretty cool. I'd like to bounce back and forth between those. There was also the stage layouts were different from the arcade, and in my opinion, actually were better in the Super Nintendo version, just because from a gameplay flow perspective, but also for whatever it is, let's just say plot reasons, as thin as that might be, it actually made more sense how they sort of readjusted the location of where the levels and some of the things that happen in the game occurred, like when the turtles get sent back in time by Shredder, because in the arcade version, it happens at the end of like the sewer surfing level, which makes like no fucking sense at all. And then they added the Technodrome level where you actually fight Shredder, and that's where you get to use the cool throw mechanic in the game to throw the foot soldiers up at the screen to actually defeat Shredder. And that is when he gets pissed off and sends you back in time. So to me, at least, that seemed to always make more sense.
Mm.
Any high level stuff on this from the two of you as far as like gameplay, things like that?
Well, I don't know how high level it is, but I do appreciate the animations and the sprites and stuff like that when I played it. I only played this very, very recently for the first time on my Retroid 2 Plus.
Oh, nice. Oh, so you did get one of those.
Yes, I did. And,
awesome.
And I played that game for this episode like 2 days ago. I remember thinking, oh, wow, for a Super Nintendo game, these animations are really, really good.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, that was impressive. And I loved the story about stealing the Statue of Liberty.
Yeah.
That's just hilarious.
Definitely the most sensical choice as far as villain plot goes.
Oh, absolutely. And my other highlight is the xenomorphs in the sewer. I thought that was fantastic.
Yeah, the pizza monsters.
Yeah, super cool. That's my input, I'm afraid. It's about as high level as I get.
No, fair enough. Jeff, anything you'd like to add?
Well, I think for me, I did play it once or twice in the arcades, but then I didn't play it for a long, long time. I think until there was some sort of release on the 360, I think. Was when I picked it up.
Oh yeah, we don't talk about that one.
No. But I mean, now we're in like oversaturation of Turtles again. I picked up a copy of it, of the Japanese Famicom one a few years ago, just because I always wanted a copy of it. And yeah, I think I played it solidly for a week after I got it, because I just realized just how good of a side-scrolling beat 'em up it is in comparison to other efforts on the SNES, especially when you compare it to like a Final Fight, which has a terrible port, which I think is all well known as well. I feel that this is, in my opinion, and this is where I need to be really careful what I say. I don't want to step on toes for the upcoming for the second part, for the second act. But it's an incredibly solid port by Konami. I think it translates incredibly well to home console, and that's why it's still popular today. It's just such a joy to play. And I think, yeah, you guys have mentioned the sprites, the little bits of animation. It kind of cartoonizes it, which was great for the time, because we were saying the cartoon was such a big hit. Yeah, like presentation, it just, from beginning to end, it's Konami way on form. It's the Konami we all remember. Really, really taking care of what they're doing and the IPs that they had a license for. I always wished, probably like a lot of people, that they released the Simpsons arcade as well.
Yes.
Like that was always my second favorite. Whenever in the arcade, I was always either picking Turtles or Simpsons.
Mm-hmm.
Usually Turtles would win, but I now obviously regret that, because we're never going to see the Simpsons again, are we? So, unless you get the one-up, that arcade in the US.
That's true. What is that, like $500 or something?
You can find it on sale, I'm sure, but yeah, that's an incredibly hard game to try and get to run. But anyway, I think that's all I really want to add.
All right, fantastic. Well, I suppose with that, let's move right on to our contender, Final Fantasy V. So some general info here. I mean, it's a Final Fantasy game. It is in fact a Japanese role-playing game, or JRPG. If you're listening to this show, I suspect you know what that means. It was released on December 6th, and of course, developed and published by Square. The critical reception and sales for FF FF5. We have a game rankings aggregate of 66, which I'm going to be honest was a little bit lower than I was expecting for this game. The only contemporaneous score that we really had listed here was Famitsu, of course. They gave it a 34 out of 40, pretty respectable. It did garner some awards and recognitions. It is the 15th all-time best game, just ever, like
Period.
Out of anything.
Wow.
Rated by Famitsu in 2006.
Wow.
Game Center CX in 2021 gave it the 34th best game of all time on their top list. And Game Fan gave it a couple of accolades, the best import game and best music import of 1992. Now, we do have some sales figures for FF5, thankfully, so it won't necessarily be a point of comparison, but at the very least, we'll get some context. If you're not aware, of course, this was released primarily in Japan. It didn't actually come to the shores for the rest of us until several years later, even though there were multiple attempts to try to get it ported. One where they actually wanted to try to port it as a PC thing, which would have been interesting, but that fell through. But at any rate, in Japan, it sold roughly 2.5 million copies. It is the 17th best-selling Super Nintendo game ever, just period. And in the year that it was released in 92, it was the second best-selling game in Japan. Kind of a big deal. I guess taking that and sort of just segueing right into some of the high-level discussion of FF5, one thing that I do want to point out here, and I feel like it might factor into some of the discussion later, at least I think it will for me, is that it potentially can be kind of hard for us to really gauge just how big of a deal this was, simply because none of us are Japanese, and we're not Japanese in 1992. But it was actually a pretty momentous occasion, to the point where they had released an OVA, an anime for it. I think it was a 4-episode run totaling just shy of 2 hours worth of content, called Final Fantasy Legend of the Crystals. This game basically birthed its own sort of little anime mini-series, which, if I recall, I think was set about 200 years in the future and follows the descendant of Bartz, or Butts, depending on how you want to refer to him as.
It's butts forever. Butts forever.
Hashtag butts forever. There you go. All right. So, gentlemen, what FF5? Talk to me about this game.
Well, it's a JRPG.
Fantastic.
It is, I believe it's the second game from Final Fantasy to use the job system, or it's rather the first Final Fantasy to revolutionize or, really take advantage of the job system, which involves changing the class of your characters and leveling them up and switching them out and vice versa. What else? 4 great characters. One is Butts, and there's 2 girls and an old guy. So what more could you want? Lots of crystals, lots of crystal shards. So if you're into meth, this is the game for you. And
just ringing endorsement.
I don't know where to start. I mean, I watched the OVA recently and it was interesting, so that was cool. And I've already talked about this last episode, so I'm a bit like, I can't even remember what I said.
Yeah. Well, and that's kind of the thing, right? It's like the further we get into this thing, there's probably less and less to say about it if you've been listening. But I mean, this is the first time for me anyway that I'm talking about FF5 here on this particular competition. I do want to kind of dovetail off of your point about the job system, because I think that's probably one of the biggest things really about FF5 and why it is so well regarded, I think, is just because this is arguably a much better take on that system, probably one of the better ones. And part of that, I think, stems from just the fact that it has this incredible level of flexibility, because in other iterations of this kind of a thing, especially in games that would follow FF5, these things tend to be a little bit more restrictive. Like, one of the things that comes to mind for me is something like Final Fantasy Tactics, which is a brilliant game, of course, but the sort of job system that you have in most of the tactics games, including like Advance and A2 and all that, is that it's sort of like a tree, like a skill tree system, something like World of Warcraft, only in that you can get to a certain job only by having that character be in a previous job first to sort of like unlock that.
Right.
Whereas in FF5, it's like almost completely freeform. It's just like, okay, well, as soon as you get to the next crystal of the 4, every time you get to a crystal and ostensibly it just explodes because you're always showing up just a little too late, which is a running theme. It blows up into shards, and those shards give you the powers of these jobs, which canonically, I guess, is like the powers of warriors past or some other fluff nonsense. Point being is that you get 4 new jobs to choose from every time, and you're more or less free to just swap to them whenever you want for any of your characters, to the point where you can really mix and match and make these very interesting combinations. Like, at a baseline, the game's sort of like tutorial or whatever kind of tells you like, hey, like you could be a knight and also have white magic so that you can heal, which is like kind of like a paladin, but you make yourself. It's like Build-A-Bear for RPG classes. And so that's kind of cool. I actually really do appreciate that system. And truth be told, because I'm going to get it out here now, because I know that there's at least one person, our lovely patron Lyle, who's probably going to listen to this, and he will want to know, I am giving FF5 another chance, and I'm going to get into this in my personal experiences category. Lyle, you should be happy about this. Okay, that's all I want to say. But at any rate, Jeff, we've been kind of talking a lot, but did you have anything that you wanted to cover for FF5 here?
Well, I mean, I'm one of those disgusting PAL region people. My first Final Fantasy was 7. I'd never heard of it when this came out. I said I'm not Japanese. I wasn't Japanese at the time, so it's a difficult one. I think I'm going all on secondhand information to make a decision today. Did a lot of video watching, so I've absorbed other opinions just to try and get a feel for how the game is. I think the 2 things that kind of stand out to me from a story perspective, kind of how maybe even today it sounds quite contemporary. You've got a world that's being overly used by its inhabitants, and in this case it seems like it decides to fight back, which is quite an interesting. I mean, I know obviously in the 90s people were still talking about, was it global warming in the 90s?
Was it the ozone layer? Or
I think it was the ozone layer.
It was the ozone.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
Fuck, that takes me back.
It was the one thing that we as a people collectively managed to fix. We abolished CFCs, so good job, everyone.
Well done, everybody. High fives. And then one of the characters, I think, isn't one of the characters like gender fluid, or there's like an LGBT character, right?
Sort of. It's arguable. I mean,
kind of.
It's a lady pretending to be a man to fit into a man's world, but I think the argument can be made that she is non-binary or something along those lines.
Yeah,
so it's debatable.
So these 2 things make you think, okay, it's actually, you put it, if you pick up those themes and you put them in a game today, it would be like, wow, finally a game that's taking on the fights and taking on the causes and all of those things. But it was, it came out in 92, so fair play to it there. But yeah, what I saw in terms of the gameplay, it sounds like that's a big clincher. I've played a lot of games in the last few years, really, even who have got job systems. We'll go on to other points in the future, but it seems like, this game really kind of set a very high standard, it seems. Yeah,
and on the point of the story and plot, I do want to make a point of kind of elaborating a little bit on that, because it was an interesting point that somebody else brought up. I'm certainly not going to take credit for this, but in having some time to kind of ponder on it, I do tend to agree. And that is, by and large, a pretty simple and straightforward affair, right? It's your party of 4. They are trying to save the world from this evil entity, and there's really no moral ambiguity or gray areas. And honestly, in some ways, that's actually kind of refreshing. Like it was probably par for the course in 1992, but when you're sort of looking at it retrospectively, like we are, a lot of games, especially RPGs and things like that, love to take this more like deconstructionist viewpoint on things of like, yes, the hero's journey, but what if we were to not do that thing? And just sort of like, try to turn things on its head or try to be subversive or whatever, or being sort of a meta commentary on things. And in a way, this game is just refreshingly simple. It's just, no, you get to have the fantasy of being the good guys. You are the good guys, and all the people in your party always get along. They have a great time. They laugh about things. and they persevere through this and they defeat the thing that is absolutely evil. There's no question about whether he's got like actually maybe okay motives, and like, what if Thanos was right? Like, it's just, nah, he's just a bad guy. That's what he does. He does it for the sake of being a bad guy. End of story. And honestly, I kind of have to respect that. It's something that you can kind of just get into. It's one of those like sort of intrinsic stories that are just a part of, you know, have been a part of human culture for basically as long as we've been telling stories. You know, it's the good guys versus the bad guys. And sometimes that's okay. And so I just want to point that out because I do kind of appreciate how straightforward I think this game takes its story.
Yeah. I also think it's interesting to point out that it is between Final Fantasy IV and VI, which both have these kind of, no, I don't want to say overly complicated, but they're much more sort of melodramatic stories involving, you know, deaths of party members and, you know, family histories and yada, yada, yada. And like just this kind of like big operatic thing. And in between those two games, there's Final Fantasy V, which is a very, like, as you said, straightforward, but also quite lighthearted story.
Yeah.
Which I really appreciated. So I totally agree. It's really refreshing compared to a lot of the other JRPGs that you come across, or at least in this time frame.
Yeah, you've got 4 and 6, and then sandwiched in the middle, you have butts.
Yeah. I love it when butts is sandwiched in the middle.
It's just the best. All right. Well, I suppose if we have nothing else to cover on either of these games at this sort of like high level academics discussion, then we probably ought to take a little bit of a break. And when we return, we will start jumping into the meat of the episode, where we start covering the 4 major categories and assigning winners that ultimately probably won't matter. So hang on tight and we will be back in just a moment.
Sewer surfing.
All right, and we are back, and hopefully so are you. So we are going to kick off our categorical discussion about these 2 games. And so to quickly recap, we're going to go through critical reception, personal attachment, legacy, and head-to-head. Let's kick things off with our discussion on critical reception and what our thoughts on that are. So I am going to start things off with Jeff. So Jeff, what are your thoughts on the critical reception of these 2 games?
Yeah, so it's quite difficult, this one, because Final Fantasy V, it only came out in one country. So Famitsu being Japanese, try not to take it with a grain of salt too much, but that's a pretty good score from them. I think the fact that it's, was it like 17th best-selling SNES game ever as well, I heard you say. But like it clearly in Japan like resonates really well. I get the feeling that it's a game that over time has become more appreciated over here in the West. It seems that when I look at what people are saying today, there's a lot of love for it in terms of how, from just a pure gameplay point of view, it really set a really high bar with that job system. So it seems like that kind of has it going for it. And then with Turtles, I mean, it's a really difficult one, because obviously Turtles was a gigantic franchise, super popular. And I'm sure at the time magazines kind of really wanted it to be good as well. You see that a lot. Like, I don't know if you guys have got any old magazines, I kind of presume you have. But there are some crazy scores that got handed out in the early 90s for some games. They're scores that just don't stack up today.
What's a magazine?
I feel like Turtles, like the 4 out of 5s and the 90%, it kind of makes sense. I'm not too surprised just because of how popular it was. But so yeah, I find it like putting them against each other. This is a really, really tricky one. What would Final Fantasy V have got if it came out in America and in Europe, Australia? I don't agree with Squaresoft and the strategy that they had at the time, because I think, like, if anything, the West shows that like we love RPGs, we love role playing. Like Dungeons and Dragons was, you know, it was a gigantic thing. So why wouldn't? And we made a lot of games over in Europe for the Amiga, for the Commodore, that were all RPGs. So I think I feel like we would have adopted it fairly well. But yeah, so that's where I am. It's hard to compare, I find.
And so if you were going to be forced to choose one to take this category for you, what would it be?
Oh, if I'm going to be forced right now, I would probably give my tilt of the hat to Turtles.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. Adam, what are your thoughts?
All right. Well, it's hard to say as well, since Turtles in Time didn't have any definitive sales figures, and it's just one of those things that anecdotally apparently sold really well, but who knows? I've remember in the past, I've been surprised by the sales numbers of something like Castlevania being surprisingly low. That being another Konami game, I'm sort of conflating the two just because it's the same developer. I think 2.5 million sales for just one country is huge. You would be lucky to get that worldwide for a lot of games. That is massive. It's also kind of hard to take the game rankings aggregate of 66% for Final Fantasy V seriously, because that seems like it's sort of done retrospectively, also because it wasn't released in the West until, much, much later.
Right.
Who's to say that number is lower because people are looking at it being from the lens of somebody that's been exposed to better games since then, I suppose, if that makes sense.
True. Yeah.
And they're like sort of judging it as a comparison to the other Final Fantasy games. But I admit that Turtles in Time has a really impressive set of review scores and review numbers. It's ranked pretty highly, got a lot of good awards and recognition, but there's no way that the critical reception and sales for Turtles, in my opinion, is better than Final Fantasy V. I think just the sheer amount of sales that it had in one country, it probably wouldn't have sold as well in the West, but if you did release it in the West at the same time, you would have at least got another million or so on top of that. And I'm betting that that's definitely more than what Turtles got, I would say, theoretically. But I pick Final Fantasy V, if that's the question.
That is, in fact, how these categories work. So that is the question. Yes. All right, great. So that's one in each category. And that just leaves me, without echoing too much of what both of you have said. I would say that, I think the majority of the rest of this episode is just going to be me trying to be as objective as possible and not just say, fuck all y'all, it's Turtles forever, because that's really what I just want to do. But we are here to be fair and balanced, if nothing else, I guess. So in the sake of at least attempted objectivity, I would tend to have to agree with Adam, I think, in that, unfortunately, we do only have, Japan's sales figures and things like that. But if you take that and extrapolate that out, not to mention the fact that, as we pointed out, FF5 got its own sort of like anime spin-off kind of thing, which, I suppose in this day and age, maybe it doesn't sound like such a big deal because we have Netflix trying to do spin-offs and ruin everything at every possible opportunity. So we might be a little desensitized to that, I guess, but it was kind of a big deal back then. And it's sort of an interesting converse, I guess, to Turtles in that I think in a lot of ways, Turtles in Time, and this is probably going to come up again, at least in my discussions, leans pretty heavily, right, on its IP. Not to say that it's a bad game, because it's certainly not by any stretch. Whereas it already had a show and a sort of pre-established thing to go for it. And the other way around, FF5 kind of established this particular version of its world and these characters, and then it had a follow-on show that was built on top of that. So I think with all of that, kind of put together, I would kind of I think I'd have to give it to Final Fantasy. Honestly, I think just comparatively, I think it probably had the better showing overall. All right. So first category, FF5 takes it with critical reception. And so from here, we're going to move on to the even more subjective section of personal attachment. We'll start this one off with Adam this time. So Adam, what's your attachment to these two games?
Okay, so Final Fantasy V at one point, I played it for the first time via emulation when I was in high school, and at that point, I think I said it was my favorite Final Fantasy game, or even my favorite game of all time. And that was probably strictly because it was so undiscovered and I was like a hipster before being a hipster was a real thing. But as I've gotten older, I care a lot less about this game. So I'm not super attached to it, but I do have a really soft spot towards this game and Final Fantasy in general. Turtles in Time, however, I've played that for the first time as of a couple of days ago on my Retroid Pocket 2 Plus, and I didn't care for it.
We and Good, the Bad, and the Backlog are not sponsored by Retroid in any way.
No, we're absolutely not. But I didn't care for it, to be honest. So
The Retroid or Turtles?
Turtles in Time.
Oh, okay.
Played it for, I think I got like halfway and I was like, oh, fuck, this is boring.
Wow. All right.
Friend, I'm going to have to give it to Final Fantasy V because I've actually played and finished that game and I like it.
It's harsh.
I'm attached to that compared to something I just picked up a couple days ago, which I didn't really like that much.
Fair enough.
Harsh but fair. All right.
Yeah.
I'll go next. Just to provide some balance to the force, if nothing else, I guess. Listen, man, this is no secret to anybody who's known me for more than like, I don't know, 15 minutes or something. If you've ever seen my home office here that I'm currently recording in, you would see the shelf of NECA figures for all of the Turtles and all of the characters from the movies. So I might be a little bit of a Ninja Turtles fan. And they were a huge part of my childhood. Like, that was my show. My brother, who's about 4 years younger than me, his thing was more like Power Rangers. That was around the time when he was kind of that particular age bracket. But for me, it was the Ninja Turtles far and away. Obviously the personal attachment category absolutely has to go to Turtles for me. I didn't even know FF5 was a thing. I didn't play really any JRPGs back when these were being released. Now, of course, this is a given for this one because we didn't get it. But I just missed all of this stuff. Even though I owned a Super Nintendo, I had a friend actually once who lent me a copy of Illusion of Gaia, and I played it for like, I don't even know, 10 minutes or something. And I was like, eh. And then I think I gave it back to them like the week later or something, which in retrospect, I was like, what the fuck is wrong with me? Suffice to say, I got into RPGs of this nature a little bit later in life. I started my RPG journey with more action oriented stuff. It's part of the reason why Diablo is like my favorite game series of all time. So I don't really have a lot of attachment at all to FF5. I will say that, in very recent memory, I've come to respect it a lot more. And this is the part where I wanted to point out specifically for Lyle's benefit, if nothing else. So we do this thing called the 4-Job Fiesta every year. We participate in it. And that's thanks to Lyle bringing it up a few years back. And without going into too much detail, suffice to say, it is an event, an annual event where you fire up a fresh, save file of FF5 and you get randomly assigned jobs through a Twitter bot that they have set up. And you have to play through the whole game with only those jobs that you have been randomly given. And sometimes you get broken combinations, and then sometimes you get complete shit selections, and it makes the run a fucking nightmare. And against the better judgment and suggestions from both co-host Chris and Lyle of saying like, hey man, maybe don't make your first playthrough of FF5 be a 4-Job Fiesta run because you might get stuck with some bullshit like Berserker or Geomancer or whatever. And I was like, yeah, no, I'm going to do that. Turns out it was a bad idea. So my first experience with FF5 was horrible because I had just a total dumpster fire of a party makeup. And I bounced off it real hard and hated it. And I've slowly come back around to it. And actually, as we speak, I am playing through the Pixel remaster. And I am happy to say that I am enjoying it much more. And I actually appreciate a lot of what this game has going for it now that I'm not constrained by some arbitrary system. So I think once I get through the game, like legit for once, I might actually start participating in the Fiesta, maybe next year. But all of that is just to say that Turtles absolutely takes this category for me without any question. So I guess that only leaves Jeff. So Jeff, what are your personal attachments here?
I'm also from that age bracket where Turtles was the biggest thing. I absolutely loved TMNT or the heroes, ninjas, whatever you want them to be. I was obsessed with the toys. I didn't go for NECA. I'm a Super 7 guy.
Ah, nice.
So I've got all 4 Turtles in Super 7 form. I get quite a lot of people comment on my Instagram feed just why do you keep posting turtle stuff? And it's just like, I guess I still love it more than I should. I tried rewatching the show recently, and I was like, no, it really was for kids. I can barely sit through one episode.
Yeah, don't do that. Yeah, it's a bad time. I have the whole thing on that DVD collection that comes in that cool little the turtle van.
Yeah.
Yeah, it looks really nice on the shelf, and that's probably where it should stay.
I never played Final Fantasy V. Like I said, the first one I played was 7. I've gone back to other Final Fantasies, but not 5. And since I've done some research for this episode, I've kind of realized, I really should pick up or at least get like a good fans translation copy on emulation, stick it on my SNES Classic. I really want to give it a go now. I won't do this crazy Fiesta run that you're talking about, but I do really, really want to give it a go. And the job system, it doesn't sound like it's full of what I would call bullshit jobs. Like Final Fantasy X2 was the first job kind of RPG that I played, and I just couldn't get my head around it. But I've played others since then, like Bravely Default, and I really enjoyed it. So I kind of really want to go back and play play that system in like its purest form and see if I can break the game and do some crazy damage. So I'm kind of looking forward to playing it, but personal attachment absolutely has to go towards Turtles. It's just the IP of kids born, between 82 and 85, I think. And that's me.
I mean, I was 86, so I'll extend it to that.
Okay, there we go. Okay,
yes.
fine. Yeah.
But no further than that. That's it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I missed the boat on that one.
But how can you play it today and not enjoy it? Do you? That's.
I mean, I wasn't gonna say it.
I don't.
Right.
I really want to keep my, sanctimonious opinions to myself. But like, what the fuck?
No, that's what we're here for, is to be entirely sanctimonious about this stuff. So go ahead.
Oh, you want me to answer it?
I want to answer. Yeah.
We want to know, Adam. You're on fucking trial right now.
Yeah, sure. It was boring. I don't like beat 'em ups. I don't like Turtles that much. I was never really attached to. I mean, I kind of liked the characters and stuff when I was a kid, but when I was a kid, it was mostly like the older brothers and sisters of my friends that were into Turtles and stuff. Not my age group. I've sort of liked it by association, but I liked the movies, the live action ones that came out. Those were great.
Yeah, okay.
But I've never been like obsessed with it the same level that the old people are.
Old people.
I'm just kidding.
The olds.
But then you don't so like in terms of like the genre, like Final Fight and Alien versus Predator and Captain Commando and Cadillacs and Dinosaurs, like that genre doesn't really float your boat then?
Yeah, no, fuck all those games. They're so boring.
Fair enough.
Holy shit. I have never in my life heard someone list beat 'em up games and put those specifically over things like, I don't know, Streets of Rage. Or I was like, fucking Cadillac, what? Sorry, go on.
Well, those are great games. Those are like great arcade games. I'm just thinking of arcade ones.
Okay, well, I played River City Girls recently, and aside from really loving the soundtrack, I just was not into the gameplay that much at all. Like, it just was so repetitive to me.
I mean, to be fair, I can understand that.
Yeah.
I mean, and you're talking to somebody who's like, Chris never quite understands why I like action RPGs so much, like why I'm so into Diablo. He's just like, yes. You click a lot and things die. And I'm like, yeah, that's the point.
Yeah.
He's like, I don't get it.
Yeah.
All right, that's fine.
Not to get too far off topic, but games like Diablo and stuff like that, you're rewarded by loot and upgrades and leveling up and new skills and stuff like that. Turtles in Time, you don't get anything new. You're just button mashing your way through level after level of, admittedly fun animated characters and stuff like that, but it's just, there's no nuance to it. It's a 2-button system. One is jump, one is attack, and you just have at it. You don't get any level ups. You don't get any rewards. If
I can quickly just interject and defend, those games are basically there to suck up quarters and coins.
Yeah.
And they take 25 minutes to beat. Like, I played Diablo 3 for the first time last year, and I was equally like, this is meant to be fun. Hour after hour after hour after hour of looting and clicking a mouse. It's like, I got better things to do with all these hours, like play Factorio. But
Wow.
it's
Okay, yeah.
there you go. It's like, where do you value your time? I like 20-minute game versus 90 hours, but that's a personal thing.
Yeah, 20 minutes for me doesn't seem like enough to warrant booting up the game. I'd rather just like wank.
I mean, yeah. Well, yeah, fair enough.
Yeah. I guess you can't argue with that, really.
Yeah, beat 'em ups, just not my genre.
Cool.
I appreciate what they stand for and that other people really enjoy them, so have at it. But, I'd much rather take a role-playing game over just a quick beat 'em up.
Fair.
Yeah.
All right. Well, with that saucy topic behind us, I guess let's go ahead and move on to the next one, which is the legacy that these games have left in their wake. So I guess I will start since I have yet to start a category here. So this is an interesting one for me, only in that unlike a lot of the other matchups in both this tournament and the King of Games 2000, I think this might be the first time where I kind of say I'm not sure that either of them have a huge one, really. And that's because I don't think that they necessarily have a legacy in and of themselves, if that makes sense. So if we're talking about like Turtles in Time, it definitely has left an impression on a whole generation of folks. I think we've made that pretty clear at this point. It was important enough to warrant having one remaster occur that should have never happened in Reshelled.
Awful.
Just another thing you can blame Ubisoft for. And which I also still have on my 360, by the way, even though it's been delisted. So I can always go back and remember how awful that was. And then apparently there was also another attempt to have this remade at some point. I don't think it ever come to any sort of fruition. So it kind of is what it is. But it is definitely remembered fondly by most people who played it then. But I think most of the legacy really is just around the Turtles IP more than anything. It is arguably one of the best beat 'em ups probably ever, just purely from a mechanical perspective. It's not overly complicated. There's not a lot of button combos to remember or anything like that. But just the gameplay of it is just smooth. It's responsive. It's quick. It's fun. Everything works the way that it should. In that way, it's usually in the upper echelons of beat 'em ups as far as that's concerned. But I guess that's kind of it. And then if you talk about Final Fantasy V, I guess just by virtue of having sort of like this spin-off like OVA and that sort of a thing, that there might be an argument to be made for its legacy there. Also, perhaps not necessarily inventing, but maybe refining and creating a sort of better baseline for, job systems such as they are in RPGs like this going forward. I think it kind of laid a lot of bedrock for that. So I think there's definitely something to be said there. It's a tough call though, because like neither one of them to me like really stands out as like like this has this huge legacy. If we were talking
Fiesta.
Okay, actually that is a good point that you bring that up. I suppose that just the fact that there is an entire community event that happens every single year around this game, largely because of the job system and just how flexible it is. I guess there's something to be said for that. That is an excellent point. Thank you, whispering voice.
You're welcome.
So I guess that's a lot to say that though I would love to just give this to Turtles because Turtles, I kind of feel like I needed to give this one to Final Fantasy V. I mean, it would have been a lot easier if it was like, let's say 7, because holy shit, like who doesn't know about Final Fantasy 7? But I think what this game has done and the way that the community has sort of kept it alive, I think that legacy sort of speaks for itself in that regard. So I think I'm giving this one to FF5. Let's go to Jeff next. So what are your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, this is a really difficult decision. Both games exist within their own franchise, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
I was thinking, would we have Shredder's Revenge if we didn't have Turtles in Time? It's like probably, because we did have other Turtle arcade games. We've had lots of attempts to make Turtle games over the years, and this just tends to be like the best formula,
right,
for them to do a Turtle game. I would think if you look at today, just how popular and how much hype there was around Shredder's Revenge, outside of like your normal, it's probably fueled a lot by people of our age who still love the Turtles, I must admit. I don't know if my niece and nephew, who are young teenagers, whether they're really interested in playing it. They're more interested in like Splatoon and what have you. Those darn kids and their crazy games.
The kids and their Fortnites.
Yeah. Ugh. So this is where I'm trying to reason out, because I think Turtles, the IP, I mean, it gets rebooted every few years by Nickelodeon. We keep getting new, well, every so often you get a new movie. Okay, legacy for the franchise itself, absolutely. But for this specific game, I think, like you're saying, it's definitely one of the best beat 'em ups on the system of that era. It's solid throughout. Great. It doesn't do anything. It didn't do anything revolutionary. It just did everything it needed to do, and it did it well. And then on the other hand, when I'm thinking of Final Fantasy V, it feels like there's a really nice community, it sounds like, behind it today. And it does feel like, you mentioned it, where you kind of, when people list out their favorite Final Fantasies, let's be honest, this never comes up.
That's true.
Unless you're a hipster.
Exactly. You really got to talk to a proper JRPG head or a real massive Final Fantasy nerd to get this to come up. Otherwise, a lot of people will just go 7, 6. Maybe you get the odd 9 here and there, or 4, especially 4. That's probably my favorite of the SNES games of that era anyway.
Same.
So 5, it gets overlooked. So that's where I'm struggling, because Turtles in Time is just a game in isolation. It just does what it does well. And 5, generally, apart from a small community, is pretty much just forgotten about. Butts gets put into the beat 'em up games. He always gets a look in. So like you can see Square Enix, or whatever you want to call them today, still really regard him as a character. But that's within, like, of course they're going to do that because it's that IP.
Sure.
All said and done, if I'm going to choose one, I think as an individual game, I'm still going to give it to Turtles.
All right. Well, we are yet again 1-1, so that just leaves it up to Adam now.
This is the easiest decision I've ever made. I'm just kidding. But honestly, Legacy, I think there's something to be said about the fact that this 4-job fiesta exists. There's a meta game going on with Final Fantasy V that you don't see with Turtles in Time. Like, occasionally you'll get these retro fan people, like you guys, who enjoy going back to these classics and playing them just for the love of the game itself. But you don't see like self-imposed challenges put on yourself for going through a TMNT game. You know what I mean? This level of, it's kind of like, what do you call that Pokemon thing? Nuzlocke.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's kind of on the level of a Nuzlocke, only like way less popular. But the fact that they've put this extra challenge on to get people to come back and play Final Fantasy V, and it's an annual thing, I think that says something about the legacy of the game, that it's so old, but it's still played contemporarily. So I don't know if you can really say that about TMNT 4, although you guys haven't brought it up yet, but isn't it going to be part of the Turtles Legacy thing?
The Cowabunga collection?
That's it, yeah. So I saw a bit of excitement about that.
It's because it was probably like the one game that's actually worthwhile in that whole
the only
collection.
good game in it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, people are excited about that. That's cool. Shredder's Revenge, that popped off for a while. Everyone was super excited about that. I played it for about 10 minutes and turned it off because I don't like beat 'em ups. But I don't think that the success of Shredder's Revenge is tied to specifically this game so much as the love of the IP itself and the fact that there hasn't been a decent Turtles game in, I'm going to say, decades. But obviously I have to give it to Final Fantasy V. It's got an OVA. It's got a metagame. I like to think that its job system has, or the success of the job system in Final Fantasy V has led to the evolution of the job systems that we see in modern JRPGs, like Bravely Default, for example. I don't know, it's kind of like the granddaddy of the job systems, I think. You could argue Final Fantasy 3 was, but I'm going to say 5 because 5 is what made it good.
Yeah, that's a good point, yeah.
Yeah, like I never played 3 because it seems like it's just a finicky nightmare, but I would happily play 5, so I'm going to give the credit to 5. Anyway, obviously I picked Final Fantasy V, so that's my little spiel.
Well, there you go. And actually, just quickly on that point, you made me think about it, and I didn't even bring this up, but it's just, I guess, another point in FF5's favor is just how ubiquitous it still is, in that you can play FF5 on damn near any console or PC or mobile device at this point.
Yeah.
Which is, to be fair, that's sort of also just a commentary on Squeenix and them just beating the shit out of their IP and trying to milk things for as much money as possible. But I mean, they wouldn't do it if there wasn't some kind of demand for having these games available, right?
Right.
Something to be said there, since we've never had Turtles in Time literally anywhere else. And I mean, again, to be fair, I'm sure that probably has something to do with licensing, because that's a nightmare. But
and the pixel remasters as well, obviously. I would like to see how that's performed, but I don't know if the numbers exist for that.
Oh, I'm not sure. We might be able to look it up. I mean, it'd probably be easier to find than some of the sales figures for these older games. That's for sure. I mean, anecdotally, I think the pixel remaster of 5 looks fantastic. And it also fixes a ton of issues and things like that. So it's carrying over a lot of fixes that have occurred in some of the other releases, like in the GBA and what have you.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's a tangent. So, so far, actually, we have yet to have a sweep, which, again, I think might be the first time for any of the episodes that I've been on. They have all been 2-1, which is a pretty close race, which leaves us with our final category, which is head to head. So let's see. Let's start this one off with Jeff this time. So, Jeff, I think I know your answer, but I'll let you speak on it anyway.
Yeah.
If someone was to drop this in front of you, which one of these would you rather play?
I'm thinking. I've said a couple of things in this chat, which kind of leads me to the answer, which maybe you're probably not expecting. But
oh no,
I've been playing TMNT games since I was 4 years old. I could barely reach the joystick for the first arcade game, and I was still desperate to play at the arcades. That it's just something that my childhood is intrinsically linked to those 4 turtles. But, like I said, I actually do really want to play Final Fantasy V. I really want to give it a fair crack, because I've played pretty much all the other Final Fantasies up to 12. So it's not a question that's been burning within me, but I have often wondered, should I even bother with 5? But doing the research and listening, especially to the last chat around Legacy, you basically swayed me. I shouldn't have voted for Turtles, but the vote is in now. Could have been a clean sweep if I'd gone second, maybe. So I'm thinking, if you were to put them in front of me today, because of the hours, or maybe how many hours have I put into Turtles in Time, considering it takes 20 minutes to complete? So the 60 minutes of Turtles in Time.
2 hours over 25 years.
Yeah. Feels like a lifetime, but yeah, 2 hours worth. I'm gonna say Final Fantasy V. I think that the modern Jeff would be really, I'm saying would be, I am really, really keen to play that. So that's where my vote goes.
Wow.
Unexpected. Yep. I'm going to be honest.
What an upset.
Yeah, I know. All right. You know what? I'll go next. I'll make this easy. It's Turtles. It's just Turtles. Like I said, I'm currently playing through the pixel remaster of FF5, and I am very much enjoying it. I think the story is charming as hell. I love the characters. The job system so far is pretty great. But if you were going to plop these two down in front of me and say, like, okay, which one do you want to play right now? I am down to play Turtles in Time probably until I die. It's one of those games that I am good at only because it was one of the few that I owned as a kid. And so I played the absolute shit out of it. It's the reason, and I've brought this up before on the show, it's the reason that I'm like weirdly good at Contra 3, where like other people are like, yeah, that's a really hard game. And I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. Just because I played it endlessly. And it's the same deal with this. But frankly, unlike some other uncultured individuals who shall not be named, I do not get bored or tired of it. So I would pretty much always play Turtles. And given that it is a nice little compact 25-ish minute package, it's like a nice little snack size game. You can kind of fit it in wherever. And I know I'm always going to have a good time with it. So definitely Turtles for me. All right, Adam.
Cool.
What's your decision?
Well, so in this hypothetical, you've put both games in front of me and you're asking me which one I would rather play.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I've just finished Final Fantasy V's 4-Job Fiesta. I don't want to play that game again.
Okay.
but I quit out of Turtles in Time halfway through because I didn't like it. So what would I do?
Neither is not an option. I just want to put that out there.
Honestly, I think I would rather do another playthrough of Final Fantasy V than pick up Turtles in Time again. Just because it was so frustrating for me. Obviously, I like Final Fantasy V better. If you were holding a gun to my head to ask me which one right now I'd rather play, I wouldn't play either because I'm tired of both of them. But
fair.
Final Fantasy V, hands down. I just think what it does tickles my pleasure center more than what Turtles in Time does. I don't know where I'm going with that.
I was just expecting you to say pickle, but that's fine.
Okay, all right, Ashton, change that. It tickles my pickle. Yeah, I mean, like it gives me the rewards that I want out of a game, which is leveling up and hitting that dopamine center in my brain. And Turtles in Time doesn't do that. It's, just a level progression. So I would always pick an RPG basically over anything else, unless it's a shit RPG. That's Final Fantasy V.
Okay. That brings us to the end of our categorical debates. And that, to recap, we have Final Fantasy V taking the critical reception category. We have Turtles in Time winning the personal attachment section. And then we bounce back over and FF5 takes both legacy and head-to-head. All 4 categories, as I mentioned, 2-1 wins. So no clean sweeps. This is, I think, going to be a close race, if I may be so bold. So we are going to go ahead and take one last break. And then when we return, we are going to give our final verdicts and vote one of these games off of the proverbial island. So stick around. We have returned one and final time, and now we make the ultimate determination, 100% objective and inassailable, such as it is, for which game is going to move on to the next bracket of King of Games 92. And so, to start things off, I'm going to hand it over to Adam. So Adam, which of these 2 games do you believe is the better game of the year 1992?
Okay, well, it's obviously Turtles in Time. No, I'm just kidding.
Great. All right, I'm marking that down.
No.
You said it.
Change my vote. Okay, it's Final Fantasy V, and I'm going to tell you why you should vote for it too.
Ooh, okay.
Yes. Out of all-time best games, all platforms, Famitsu gave it 15th of all time. I haven't seen the full listing, but I'm betting you that Turtles in Time didn't make the list. It sold 2.5 million copies in one country alone. Turtles in Time didn't even sell well enough to have sales figures recorded.
Yep.
It also spawned its own OVA movie thing where a girl gets a wind crystal stuck inside herself and then farts out wind.
Shit.
How can you not love that?
Nice.
Yeah, that's basically it.
They really knew their demographic.
Yeah. You should actually watch that clip. It's really hilarious.
I have it on my watch later list. By the way, you can find this whole thing on YouTube. So
yeah,
I highly encourage everyone to go watch it.
I literally watched that not that long ago, and it's got like this like sexy dominatrix chick, and she has they're like sidekicks or whatever, but they're like really chubby, muscular women that are dressed as cats. So, if you're into that,
there you go.
Give it a go. But yeah, it was ranked well. It sold well. It's been on tons and tons of other platforms. It's been on Game Boy Advance. It's been on PlayStation 1. It has a pixel remaster. It's got a meta game through the 4-Job Fiesta, which people still play annually. And it is the granddaddy of the job system. So, I mean, it has a lot that it's done for the franchise and video games in general. I think it's revolutionized RPGs in some ways. It's had a lasting effect on the industry as a whole. And Turtles in Time is just a beat 'em up. A good beat 'em up. But there are other beat 'em ups out there, and there have been other better beat 'em ups. So, Final Fantasy V.
Okay.
My argument kind of fell apart at the end there, but
No, I mean, that's, yeah. So we've got one check mark in the FF5 category for this one. And I'm going to potentially fall on the sword and be the one to go last. So, Jeff, I'm going to have you go next. So,
oh, Jesus.
What is your ultimate determination here?
So I just made a few notes just to counteract, or just at least to, why should I vote for Final Fantasy V? And, I find it quite hilarious that I should listen to a Japanese magazine and the Japan shock horror who like a Japanese RPG. I think every time a Final Fantasy game came out, it was top of the charts for a number of weeks. Little bit of a boast here. I was actually in Akihabara when Final Fantasy IX dropped, of all places. And it was pretty incredible just seeing how they react to a new Final Fantasy. So I've seen it firsthand and they absolutely adore that series. And then when you say, well, it didn't even get ported, it didn't make it to America, what does that say? Let's leave that there.
Are we supposed to respond to that?
No. I'm just going to...
No, he just wanted to drop the mic. Okay. That's what happened. Yeah.
And then on the turtle side, shock horror, America likes games where they beat things up.
And eat pizza. So it's a no-brainer that Turtles was popular in the West, gigantic cartoon, big in the arcades, toys were crazy, kids got obsessed. We got 2 kids here still obsessed with it. It was just a phenomenon. And it still lives today. Like Turtles' legacy in general, still making Baird and Eastman very, very rich men. Or I think they sold it off at one point, didn't they? But they're still living off that money, I'm sure. Oh, yeah.
It's by and large a cultural phenomenon, but that's the same as Final Fantasy. I think that's a cultural phenomenon as well. And when you look at the genres, I think in these competitions, JRPGs generally do well. I think it's quite a popular genre within these circles. And beat 'em ups, generally, aside from you would probably argue Streets of Rage 2, beat 'em ups are pretty one-dimensional and are seen as that, and they're seen as a bit of fun, but they are kind of, as I was saying earlier, they're just there to churn up credits and to take your money and give you a bit of a dopamine fix, every few seconds because you recognize something from what you know. This is me being a really long-winded way of saying I don't know, and I'm trying to find. I'm still like getting to that point where I need to make a decision. I think it's a really fair point on the legacy part and where Final Fantasy V is today. I think that's really interesting, genuinely interesting. It's great that people still find ways to make it a fun and accessible game and give people challenges. Because I did see that it's quite easy to break with the right job combination. So it's great that people kind of make it more difficult for themselves. I think that the really basic story sounds like it lets it down, especially in comparison, like you were saying, to 4 and 6. But especially when you look at the popularity of the story of 7, not 8. I was going to say 8 just to be funny, but let's not even bother with that. There's definitely there's pros and cons to these games. I think genuinely for Turtles to be in the top 20 is an incredible achievement, just because I think, as you're saying, beat 'em ups are kind of poo-pooed quite a bit. Whereas Final Fantasy, like I said, I feel like they're always going to, whenever there's a year with a Final Fantasy, it will always be up there just because of how people love those games. So all that said and done, where am I going to vote? That's a good question. I think that I'm going to have to put on my, as best as possible, my unbiased hat and go, okay, today, if you were to talk to, your layman, your average person, average gamer, which game would they rather play or pick up? I don't think they say either. I think they'd be a bit like, yeah, well, neither of them sound exceptional. They'd rather play something modern. So again, I'm stuck in the middle. Does someone want to give me a push?
I say this is the most epic waffle I think I've ever heard in my life.
So I am going to do what I thought I would do at the beginning. I'm going to vote Turtles. And the main reason is that it's for the game that it is, and I love that genre, it does it all exceptionally well. I feel that Shredder boss within like the third stage in the Technodrome, when you're throwing it at, you're throwing the foot soldiers at him, is one of the first games I remember playing where I felt like there was like a third dimension to it. I was really impressed as a kid, and I still find it fun and funny today. You know, Rocksteady and Bebop in their pirate costumes. I'm 38 years old, but I still kind of laugh about that. The suit, and yeah, I feel like that's got to be my reason. I think both games are going to struggle in the next round. I think there's some incredible titles, but I feel like I would be doing my 8-year-old self an injustice if I didn't vote for Turtles. So that's where I am.
That's totally fair, and also makes my choice here that much more difficult. So thank you. All right. So we are 1-1. I'm going to be the tiebreaker, as I suspected I might be. So I've put a lot of thought into this, and I don't have a well-written sort of rationale like I did for the Mortal Kombat episode, which I believe in the order these are coming out, that's already happened. If not, then you'll hear it soon. This is more off the cuff, but I've been pondering this for the last week or so, and it's been rattling around in my head a lot. And I've, much like Jeff, I've been kind of going back and forth quite a bit. When we talk about FF5, I think Adam brings up a lot of fantastic points. I think he touched on a lot of things that I would have said anyway. You know, it did, as I mentioned before, arguably lay the groundwork for the job systems that many games following it have, iterated on and arguably improved upon. But, it laid that bedrock, which I think is important. It does feel like it tends to get overlooked, mostly in favor of especially the games on sort of either side of it, with 4 and 6 for sure. But then again, you are competing with a pretty high bar there. I think it's safe to say. The release of it in Japan, and that's the thing, is it's difficult too, because I try not to be super sort of Amerocentric if I can help it, right? And I need to try to look at this somewhat objectively, and not just as my sort of knee-jerk reaction is, as an American growing up in the early 90s, I was like, what the fuck is Final Fantasy, first of all? Because that was just me. But even then, it was we didn't get 5. So I have no knowledge of it. I didn't care, whatever. But it was huge. And sure, Final Fantasy is generally well regarded, regardless of what they put out, even if it's maybe kind of trash. The Japanese tend to eat that stuff up. It's a very popular franchise. But being the second best selling game in 1992, it's a pretty big deal. 17th best selling game ever. Again, that is quite notable. And of course, having the OVA and all of those things, plus having the community that's built up around it. Even other FF games don't have that, where Final Fantasy V definitely does. And pretty much all of that is owed to the job system mechanics that the game has. So there's a lot to be said there. When you go and look at Turtles in Time, it is, at least in my definitely objective opinion, one of the best beat 'em ups ever. And I'm not a huge beat 'em up guy, actually. I'm really not. But having played, a handful of the others, particularly more of the popular arcade titles at the time, like Simpsons or X-Men Arcade or what have you, it's definitely way up there. And it is somewhat simplistic in that regard, but that's, in my opinion, that's okay, because it does what it does very well. It's a great representation of the Turtles IP. You basically get the greatest hits of all of the characters that you would expect and want to see. And so if you were or are a fan of the Turtles, then that is definitely a treat. And they are all represented pretty much exactly how you would expect them to look from, the cartoon and what have you. Here's the sticking point for me. And this came to me fairly recently, and I can't shake it. And part of it is, honestly, it's me being consistent with how I ultimately made my decision in some of the other matchups in this tournament. And that is, I asked myself the question, if you were to divorce the game from the IP, would anyone give a shit? And the answer to that is, in my opinion, kind of, in that I think mechanically it is a very solid beat 'em up game. I don't think there's any question there. But as we've sort of pointed out, it doesn't necessarily do anything revolutionary. It just does what it does, but it does it very well. But if it was just a beat 'em up with just some random characters in a universe that's totally new, that no one has any vested interest in, would we be looking at it the way that we do now? I don't think we would. I think we would be looking at it as like it was like a middle of the road Super Nintendo game that was like a good beat 'em up, and it's a fun way to waste 20 minutes, but nobody ultimately really cares too much. And it certainly probably would have never gotten a remaster or inspired something like Shredder's Revenge. It just would have been one of those games like Soul Blazer that just existed on Super Nintendo and then everyone forgot about, which also Soul Blazer is a pretty solid game. And I think that deserves a remaster, but that's a different discussion. So that is a really hard thing for me to admit as like the resident Turtles fan of Retro Hangover. But having said that, I actually think I'm going to give this to Final Fantasy V. I think it deserves it more. As much as it kind of pains me to say that, I do believe after having experienced both of these games and really looked at, the details and the general sentiment around both of them and how they performed back in 92 and then the legacy they've left behind, I have to agree with Jeff in that I believe that I love that Turtles in Time was even on this list and that it made it to this spot. That makes me happy. If I was going to be just completely subjective and not give a shit, I would, of course, want Turtles in Time to just win the whole damn thing, because of course I would. But I don't think we're going to do that. And just for context, by the way, if anybody's curious how this ended up getting seeded, Turtles in Time in our list of games came out in the 4th spot with FF5 at 13th. So there's definitely not a lack of love for Turtles in Time amongst the folks that are participating in this tournament.
The older folks.
Yes, the olds.
Yeah.
The boomer millennials.
Yeah.
The people that are 2 years older than me.
Yeah, exactly.
I think it's just those things like when you, of our age, when you think of Turtles and Turtles in Time, immediately you just go to a happy place.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you're like, that game's great. Boom, in, absolutely. And then Final Fantasy V, you start thinking, I actually preferred 4. 6 is a better game. It doesn't, everyone has their preference, obviously, with Final Fantasy games, but I can completely see why they ended up where they ended up. But when you have the conversation, when you talk it out, I think it's a fair result, in all honesty. I think I had to make sure I voted, at least make sure Turtles got a vote in this whole damn thing.
And I appreciate that you did that.
So that I can look like the crazy guy who can't let go of his toys and plushes and all his DVDs and what have you. No, I think, when I reflect being on the losing voting side, I think it is actually a very good result. And I think I really, really do want to play 5 now.
All right. Well, folks, there you have it. I don't know about anybody who's listening to this, but I know for myself, I went into this matchup thinking that I was going to say some very different things and that perhaps it was going to go in a different direction. But that's kind of how these King of Games episodes go. You never quite know what's going to occur. So there you have it. Final Fantasy V, the 13th seed out of our something like 20 games that we started talking about at the beginning of this thing, is going to be moving on to round 2.
You've done the right thing.
So I suppose with all of that being said, first and foremost, of course, I'd like to thank both of you for being here with me today to kind of hash this one out.
Not a problem.
You're welcome.
You're so polite. I want to give both of you an opportunity, as we are wont to do. So Adam, I've already mentioned what it is you do, but why don't you expand on that a little bit? So for the folks listening to this, what do you do on the internet and where can they find you?
Oh, shit. I didn't prepare myself for this. I am one of 2 people that host a podcast. It's called The Good, the Bad, and the Backlog. And we just talk about games that we have on our backlog that we have played and completed, usually. And you can find us on Linktree, which is linktr.ee/goodbadbacklog. And we have Chris on quite a bit sometimes. Like, he tends to come on as a guest a few times, so you can listen to him on our show if you like. But yeah, anyway, we just like to have fun, crack jokes, and mostly just crack jokes and make really bad potty humor references and stuff. So that's us.
Well, you're certainly speaking to the right audience. I'm fairly certain if they're listening to us. So there you go.
Check out our 69th episode.
Nice. All right. And Jeff, What is it that you do, and where can people find you? Assuming that you want to be found. I don't know. I just make that assumption about everyone.
Yeah, no worries. Well, I mean, I have an inactive Instagram account, G-Spot Gaming. Still got hundreds of posts there on video games, retro and modern. So anyone feels inclined, they can check that out. But I would say if your audience enjoy this series, then the podcast that I was a part of, the Region 3 Gamers, for a couple of years and has now ceased to exist. But we did a King of Games for the year 1998, which includes your Ocarina of Times and your Metal Gear Solid. So if anyone's interested in going through that and they like this format, then I would recommend you go onto your podcast medium or of choice and see if you can find it and give it a listen. It's a few years old now, but we had great fun doing it. And doing episodes like this remind me of just how fun, excruciating, painful, but ultimately, uplifting. And, they give you a lot of personal growth listening and doing these chats. So, yeah, I recommend you go and check that out.
I will absolutely second that recommendation. King of Games 98 was fucking wild, and I'm still angry about some of the decisions, but it is a good listen, to be sure. All right. Well, and as far as we're concerned, if you're listening to this, well, first of all, if this is the first time it's come out, then that means it is on our Patreon feed. So you already know who we are, and we very much appreciate that you are here and you are listening to this firsthand. If you are listening to this on our main podcast feed, then we also appreciate you just for being here. Hello and welcome. We hope that you're enjoying this stuff. If you would like to hear things like this first, or in a lot of cases, some exclusive content, you too can become a patron if you'd like to support the show in that fashion. It is not, of course, required, but it is certainly very much appreciated. And you can find that as well as all of our other stuff over at our Linktree, because that's what all the cool kids are doing. Apparently, by the way, I found out that Linktree is like so 2008 or some shit, but
what?
I'm old, so I don't care. So we still have a Linktree and probably will until the service ceases to exist because we're just, ornery and stubborn like that. But you can go to Linktree/Retro Hangover and find a finely curated menu of buttons that take you anywhere you want to go as long as it's related to us. So please feel free to check that out. And with all of that being said, we look forward to catching up with you next time on the next installment of King of Games 1992.
Bye.